We're going to have another question and answer session. It's been about a month, a little over a month since we've had one. I had a few other questions that had been submitted. I actually got one new question this afternoon. No, we're not going to talk about it tonight, although it is related in some ways to our second question tonight. And I might even throw that in there as a teaser when we get there. We'll see what happens in that regard. As always, our task in answering a question that is of the biblical nature is to find a "Thus saith the Lord" answer. But, and tonight, at least with one or two of these questions, the answer, as far as I can tell, and if you find it, show me, but as far as I'm aware, the answer is not spelled out or given to us in a very direct fashion. And a couple of these questions, you just gotta think about it, and I'm going to throw out some possibilities because I don't want to just say this is the case when it might not be the case. And that's okay. It's good to think through some of this, and it's good sometimes to walk away and still be kind of wrestling with exactly what is this text saying or not saying. It's not only good for us mentally, I think it is spiritually as well. Here's the first question, without further ado. Did they hear the voice? And then if you wanted to put a little dash out the side there, if you're filling out the handout, I should probably push some buttons or something here. And see, I think it's my fault. I didn't even use it at the beginning, and now it's not working. So it's what you get for not doing your job, right? And I'm not doing that. All right, we're going to stop there for now. I'm trying to break the battery compartment here. All right. Tonight is not my night for a cursor. Okay, I think we're working. I'm not going to cross my fingers, but I'm feeling that might be what we should do. If you want to put out beside, did they hear the voice, you could put two more words, or not. This question is based on what has been sometimes put forth by biblical critics in the very negative sense, that have said there's a contradiction in the book of Acts. Now, there are people that point out supposed contradictions in more than one in Acts and throughout the Bible, for that matter. But this is one of them. But I've also seen some Christians that were sincerely wondering. They weren't trying to make something of it or going looking for a contradiction, but they were reading through the book of Acts. They remembered reading something earlier in Acts that they weren't sure quite added up with something they read later in the book, several chapters later, about the same event. Acts chapter 9. Let's go ahead and read the first 9 verses, this opening paragraph that describes for us, we call it Saul's conversion. This is something that we've studied a couple of times in a couple of different formats, one that I led and one that I didn't lead, so there's that. But let's look at Acts chapter 9, 1 through 9. We're going to focus in on verse 7. Heads up there, so be watching for verse 7. Acts chapter 9, 1 through 7. But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Verse 3, now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him, and falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and then you will be told what you are to do. The men, verse 7, who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And the last verse here of this paragraph, for 3 days he was without sight. Acts 9, 1 through 9. In verse 7, did they hear the voice that spoke to Saul? Shake or nod? Yeah. It says they heard a voice. They didn't see anyone, but they heard a voice. Now let's go to Acts 22. Acts chapter 22. This time 6 through 11. This is the first of 2 times Paul retells his conversion account as a part of his trials in Jerusalem and Caesarea. This is in Acts 22. And as I said, we'll begin reading at verse 6. We'll read this paragraph so we gather the context a bit more than just one verse. Although, to give you a similar heads up, verse 9 is going to be the verse to look at or focus in on for this passage. Acts 22, 6 through 11. As I was on my way and drew near to Damascus, about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. And I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. So far, so good. Now verse 9. Now those who were with me, and actually I forgot. I was going to interrupt myself, and so I just interrupted myself. I'm going to have to read this verse from a different version, okay, to make it a little, can I say fun? I don't know if fun's the right word, but we'll go with fun. He thinks it works. All right. Verse 9, I'm reading from the English Standard that I usually use. This is not the English Standard, and we'll have more fun. I won't even tell you what version it is. How about that? But this one says, And those who were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not. Ooh. And I thought a typo or something. I mean, it's in the version. They did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. And then verse 10, back to the ESV, and I said, What should I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Rise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all that is appointed for you to do. Last verse of this paragraph, and this other end of it is right, is so far so good too, right? Since I could not see because of the brightness of that light, I was led by the hand of those who were with me and came into Damascus. So which is it? And some of you, if you're reading the ESV, okay, you already know where some of this is going. I had to pull that out for that reason. But depending on versions, how do you explain that, right? They did hear the voice in Acts 9:7, and Acts 22:9, they did not. Did and did not, those aren't the same, right? The law of non-contradiction, it's a fancy way of saying you can't have two things being true that are not the same. It doesn't work. So, some people point to that and say, okay, there you go. Either Saul got mixed up, or Luke got mixed up, or they both did, or Luke did both times, or one of those times at least, something is amiss. But then, does anybody have I know some people in here are using the ESV tonight anyway, so you've read it. All right, let's read the ESV now. Or a few other versions will be similar. Acts 22, verse 9 says, Now those who were with me saw the light, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. And then some translators, the ESV translators are one of those, even have a footnote, a margin note to give you a little more information that adds the idea that they did not hear with the understanding. And if you want to go a little deeper, and I'm not really asking if you want to, we're going to go, ready or not. They're not even the same Greek word at all. The word in Acts chapter 9 and the word in Acts 22, they're completely different Greek terms, even though they both relate to hearing. And here's a fun one in Acts 22. The word in Acts 22, and this is just a bit of trivia that some might find interesting, it's where we get our English word for phone and phonetics and all of that. If you look it up, we were doing some of that in David's class this morning. If you just look up the basic, like in Strong's or something, a pretty simple search, the transliteration of that Greek word in English is the same letters as phone, P-H-O-N-E. It's not pronounced the same, but it is the same in that way. These are two different words. One refers to hearing in general, where you just hear something. You hear a sound, you hear a voice. That's Acts chapter 9. The other word is more than that. It is you understand, you comprehend it. And we do this all the time. We hear somebody off in a distance. We hear voices that are traveling. We might hear somebody, I was mentioning that a minute ago, right? Where Gary and I had a little private conversation up here. We do that, where you hear a voice. Okay, somebody's talking. I hear it. I didn't quite catch what you said. It happens in conversation even, right? Where, could you say that again? Pardon me? What did you say? That's part of what's at work here. So this first question, although if you're reading certain versions, might be, whoa, it's actually a pretty easy explanation. I put it this way, and I think it's on your notes that way, that it's merely a matter of hearing something, hearing a sound or voice, versus understanding what is said. It's actually not that difficult. In fact, out of the three questions tonight, this one is, in my opinion, by far the easiest. Not that difficult. So we're going to move on. I don't know that we need to spend any more time thinking about that one. It's pretty easy once you realize, hey, in the original language, there's a difference here. It didn't always come through that way in certain English text that can throw you. That's the first question. Did they hear the voice or not? Yes and no, right? They heard it, but they didn't understand it. They also saw the light, but they weren't blinded because they didn't see Jesus. Right? And I've wondered about that. This is not a part of the question. What was that trip like the rest of the way to Damascus? And they were close to Damascus, but what was it like to lead the guy that you were going with to help persecute Christians? What was that like to lead him by the hand into Damascus so he can become a Christian? Now, we don't have any idea. Nobody does. What happened to them? Did they become Christians too? Second question for our question and answer. Did Moses lie? You can throw Aaron in there too. But for the sake of being easier to put on the screen and things, we just go with Moses. Did Moses lie? Let's take a look at it. Exodus, where we're going to be, of course, Exodus chapter 5. Exodus 5, the first 4 verses, just 3 days. How long were the Israelites going to be gone when they left Egypt? And Moses, in the famous words, made famous, if not by the Bible itself, by the movie, let my people go. Moses tells Pharaoh that. How long is that go going to be? Just 3 days? Exodus chapter 5, 1 through 4. And then there are 2 other passages that we'll consult as well. Exodus 5, 1 through 4. And this is after Moses and Aaron have their meeting with each other, and Moses' meeting prior to that with God at the burning bush. Exodus 3 and 4. Now we get to Exodus 5. Here they are. The first time ever they're going to go and have a meeting in the court of Pharaoh, the leader of at the time, what might be called one of the superpowers of the known world. Afterward, Exodus 5:1, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord." So they're saying this is what God says. The God of Israel, let my people go, so they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. Note the all caps in these situations. And moreover, I will not let Israel go. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please, let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness. We may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And then he actually makes the burden that much worse if you keep reading. That's Exodus 5, 1 through 4. And Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, God says. Let us go 3 days into the wilderness. So it'd be longer than 3 days. If it's 3 days travel and 3 days back, and you got to hold the feast. But it starts with, let's go 3 days journey. Just 3 days. And look at the other 2. We'll read these for the sake of a bit more comparison. Exodus chapter 8, verses 21 through 23, picks up part of this story concerning going away for 3 days in the journey. All right, I've got the wrong reference here, don't I? Okay. All right, go down to verse 25. All right, I don't know how 21 through 23 got there. I think it got in my notes originally and stayed there. It was stubborn. All right, Exodus 8:25. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so. The offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us?" And here it is, verse 27. "We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he tells us." And then Pharaoh says, "I'll let you go. Only you must not go very far away. Plead for me." And then Moses said, "Behold, I am going from you and will plead to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart from his servants, from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord." But then you finish the chapter. God removes the plague. Pharaoh hardens his heart, won't let the people go. I'll throw this in there. The new question that we will look at a later time, how did God harden Pharaoh's heart? The Bible says that more than once, that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. How did he do that? Why did he do that? What does that mean? Come back another time. I don't even know when that time will be, so I can't give you same time, same place, or anything like that. But we'll talk about it. We'll talk about that one later. And then Exodus, I keep saying Acts. Exodus chapter 10, and this reference should be right, 7 through 11. More of this theme or this story continues concerning their departure. Exodus chapter 10, 7 through 11. Then Pharaoh's servant said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go. They may serve the Lord their God. Do you not understand that Egypt is ruined?" And this is after the 8th plague and the locusts, where their crops were completely decimated. So, verse 8, Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God." But which ones? Which ones are to go? Moses said, "We will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and daughters and with our flocks and herds, for we must hold a feast to the Lord." But he said to them, "The Lord be with you if ever I let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No, go, the men among you, and serve the Lord, for that is what you are asking." And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. By the time you get to this point, then, Pharaoh is suspicious. He's like, "Okay, well, who's going? I'll let you go, but you leave the young ones back. Leave your elderly back," thinking, hey, you're not going to leave them behind. Because Moses is thinking, if I let you go 3 days' journey, what's to stop you after that point? If you go out 3 days away into the wilderness, and if they got a 3 days head start, that makes it a little tricky for him and his army to track them down and catch up to them, right? He's suspicious. He's saying, you got something else in mind. You can go, and he tries to tell them what they're really asking. Do you see that too? He's like, you're just asking for the men to go, so that's what's going to happen. By that point, he's pretty sarcastic, and he's saying, hey, you better be careful if I see your face again. And by the time this ends, Moses says, no, you're not going to see me again, even though they kind of do. And that's a whole other story as well. But what about the whole story? Why is it that Moses keeps indicating and saying, we're going to go 3 days? And if you've read the whole book of Exodus, you know that God's plan to deliver his people is not to give them a few days break to hold a feast and then come back to slavery in Egypt. That was never God's plan. And that's not what happened. They never do that. They leave Egypt and they leave Egypt. They don't come back. At least not physically. Let's go back, though. Let's go backwards. We started in chapter 5. Let's go back to chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. Let's start reading at verse 18. We are in this discussion now between God and Moses. The burning bush discussion. Here's where God, for the first time, commissions Moses for his mission to rescue, be the human rescuer, deliverer, the hand of God, to rescue his people out of Egypt, along with some assistance from Brother Aaron. Here's part of what God had told Moses. Exodus 3, verse 18. We're going to read through 22. And they will listen to your voice, they being Israel, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. And that's what Moses says that we read earlier in Exodus chapter 5, isn't it? Moses was right when he says, this is what God says. Let's go. I mean, even the details are lining up. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, met with us. All matches up. I did say we're going to read through 22, so maybe we should do that. He comes back to commentary now. Here's what you tell Pharaoh. And here's what I also know. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. That's Exodus 3:18 through 22. So if we say that Moses lied to Pharaoh, that goes back, that doesn't stop. The buck stops here. The buck doesn't stop with Moses and Aaron. It goes back to God. God told Moses to say that. 3 days, hold the feast. So did God tell Moses to lie? Might be the question to ask now, right? Not just did Moses lie, but did God tell Moses to lie? In that way, did God lie to Pharaoh? A God who, what? Cannot lie. Titus 1:2, Hebrews 6:18. There's a few other verses you could get into as well that make that crystal clear. What's the explanation then? God can't lie. What happens here in the story of Exodus? Here's some questions. One, what if what's happening here is the first step? What if this is totally true, period? I mean, there's nothing missing. There's nothing fishy going on at all. It's a request for 3 days' journey, a feast. But that's if Pharaoh had ever agreed to it. That's also a pretty big hypothetical in itself, that they would have gone and had a feast. And that would have been the first step in this bigger journey of leaving Egypt. Okay? Possible. Or what if it's a matter of part of the truth? Now, we say things like, what? The whole truth? I can't even say it now. All right. Yeah, you got it. I had it, and then I lost it. Okay. Yeah, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Yeah, I still missed something. All right, yeah. So help me, God. We got it. We got the point at least. All right. We think of it. We think along the line. We talk about it. The whole truth or nothing else. You just got to give me everything. But there are times when not telling everything you know is okay. There's times when not saying anything is okay. Maybe the best example of this would be Jesus on trial. Were there ever times when Jesus is asked point-blank questions and he, as Isaiah said, was like a sheep and silent? He didn't answer. Now, when he's put under oath, he answers. Okay, there's something to that. So, some have compared it to parents, in that sometimes parents, they won't tell their children everything that's going to happen. Maybe it's a trip, and they hold back some of the things they're going to do on the trip, vacation. Does that mean the parents are lying to the kids? I don't think so. I think parents have a right to withhold some information from their children. So is it also possible in a much bigger way that the God of the universe doesn't have to show his full hand? And now you can go home and say, Gantt made a poker analogy in a sermon, okay? There you go. Does the God of the universe have to tell everything up front to Pharaoh? Is he allowed to conceal certain things? I think there's a passage about God concealing things, and it's the glory of kings to discover them. Okay? So what if it's that? What if it is, we're going to go a 3 days journey, but we may not stop there. I mean, Moses isn't told, and he doesn't tell Pharaoh that. He doesn't say we're going to go a 3 day journey, hold a feast, and that is everything. He doesn't say that. Okay? So it is left somewhat open there. What happens after the feast is over? Now, knowing human nature, I think we can make a pretty good conclusion that you're going to have to drag the Israelites back to slavery if they get out of Egypt 3 days. There's even that factor from the human standpoint. But that's not really our question tonight. Here's one more. Question or answer to a question. And just like a good Jew tonight, we're answering a question with some more questions. And Jesus did that, so we got some good precedent for that too. What if it's a test? And this is where I lean tonight. And the test fits back into some of the other parts. Like sometimes parents might test their children by not telling them everything and see, I'm going to see what kind of attitude they have toward this part, and then we might get to the other part, right? Go back to verse 19. Verse 18 is the supposed lie. Exodus 3, the last passage we looked at. What followed that, right after that, God says, but I know. He's not going to listen. He's going to be hardened against it. He's not going to let you do anything, whether it's 3 days journey or whatever it is. So I wonder if that's at work here. If the God of the universe puts Pharaoh to the test and says, you go and ask for 3 days journey and a feast. See what he says. Because God, in his sovereignty and in his knowledge, therefore, of the future, he knows how Pharaoh is going to react to that. He's not going to listen. He's not going to pay any attention. He's even going to start by saying, I don't even know who this Yahweh character is. Why would I pay attention to that? In his ruling arrogance. Put ruler and arrogance together and you get that. I wonder if that's what's happening. God says, you go and ask for 3 days. See if he'll give you 3 days. If he doesn't give you 3 days, then there's no chance he's going to give you anything more than that. So is it the first step in a longer journey? Maybe. Is it God telling part of what's going to happen, and there's more to it than that? Maybe. Or is it a test? Is he testing Pharaoh's heart? Trying his heart, as we know God in other places does. Some things to think about tonight. Did Moses lie? I don't think so. I don't think Moses lied. Is it an easy question? No, I don't think so either. But it doesn't have to be, thankfully. Last question tonight. The dishonest steward is commended? This one comes from Luke chapter 16. The master and the dishonest manager are steward. Luke 16, it is a parable. We call it the parable of the dishonest manager, the unjust steward. It gets called a lot of different things, partly dependent on English translation. Luke 16, 1 through 8 is, or 1 through 9 is the parable. Verse 8 is the key verse for us this evening. All right. Here's a summary of the parable. Someone informs a master, he's the owner, that his steward, we would think today of a manager, someone that owns a business. They own a restaurant, they're the owner, but they have someone else, as is common, manage it. Might have more than one manager of their affairs. Somebody tells the master, this steward, he's not running things right. It isn't clear if that means he is defrauding the master, as in it's wickedness and fraud, or if it's just he's mishandling, he's not handling the funds in the best way. Mishandling in that way. Even though mishandling, even in our minds today, tends to bring with it other ideas. Most translations are something like he's squandering your possessions. And so the master goes to the steward and gives him a heads up, you're about to lose your job. He gives him enough time so that the steward goes out and he goes to different clients, different customers, and finds out how much they owe the master. He tells them, change that. So like if you owe 100, mark it down to 80. Make it 80 instead. And in that way, he's thinking ahead. When he does lose his job, he'll have some friends, have some people that will help him out. He can turn to them. Maybe they'll give him a job or at least help him out until he can get his affairs more settled. And then we come to verse 8. Luke 16, verse 8. Let's read this one together. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. The question then is, why did Jesus have the master praising the dishonest steward for being what is called shrewd here? It is the word for wisdom, but there's a reason that most translations have it as shrewd, because shrewd even today tends to be you're being smart, but not in a good way. You're intelligent, but you're not using your intelligence the best way. Talk about an evil genius. He's not an evil genius, but that would be the extreme of this idea. Shrewd. Why does Jesus have him being commended? Let's back up here. A word of caution or carefulness about parables. This is one general idea here in response to this question, is that a parable is a parable. It is a story. We need to be careful that we don't take every detail as having a spiritual parallel, or, I don't know that that's what's happening here, but we might do some other things. Here's one. It's easy to read the parable and assume, because a lot of parables work that way, that the master is Jesus, right? Or God. And here's his servant. God's always the master, right? Or not. There's some things to work through here. You got to keep in mind, this is a parable. It's a story. The point of the story might not be at all that you need to be commended for being shrewd and or dishonest. Look at the rest of the verse. Here's where Jesus gives you the point. See, we stopped before the for, the because. For, the rest of verse 8 says, the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation, or this age. You might have a footnote for that actually does work better with generation, than the sons of light. And it sure seems like the sons here of this age, or are they people that aren't a part of Jesus' disciples? They're at least worldly people, it seems, maybe. The sons of light would clearly be people that follow Jesus. And then verse 9, you get a bit more. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth. So verse 8 is more an observation, a statement of fact about how things sometimes or often are. Verse 9 is more, here's what you need to do with this. Make friends with what he calls unrighteous wealth or possessions, so that when the money fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. The point has something to do then with how you use what you have. But why does he call it even here? Why does he say use unrighteous wealth? Why does he call it unrighteous or dishonest? Here's something else to think about. Is what the steward does in having the people mark down their debts, is that wrong? Today it would be, because of how we do things today. But in their culture, you'd pay your bill to the master. But the bill you were given, I should have said you pay your bill to the steward, okay? Because the bill you were given was from the steward for what you owed the master. This is in Jeff's area. I'm not good with money, so if this doesn't make any sense to you, talk to Jeff. He can fill you in on that. But the steward would give you a bill that included what you owed the master, the actual price for goods and or services, with his stewardship fee tacked onto it. So as a customer, you just get one bill. And then the steward passes on what the master gets after he takes his cut, his fee out of it. A little different than how we operate today with employers, and all that. That might be what's happening. so, and that's why I have the question of excessive charges there. All right. What if the steward goes back to people that he had charged an excessive fee and takes off some of that, or even takes his fee off completely? He's about to get fired. So what if that 100, that 20 was the steward's fee, the 80 was the original that the master would get? But that's happened. That puts a whole different spin on things when he's commended by the master. What if the assumption that what he did is wrong, what if that might not be the case, and so when he's commended, he should be commended? He's just been wise. He's thinking ahead. He knows what's coming. He uses what he has available to win him some friends down the road. And then what about that word, unrighteous or dishonest? It's found several times in this chapter. It's not always translated the same way. I'm not trying to make a whole lot out of that, I don't think, but you got to think through, what does that mean here? Go back to that other question we asked earlier. Why does Jesus call wealth unrighteous here? Is Jesus saying that all wealth, all money is sinful or unrighteous? Well, I don't think so. If so, we're all in big trouble. No, that's not the case. Or is Jesus using unrighteous here in a bit of a odd spin, or on its head? He's using unrighteous here to describe things that are of this world, things that are so tempting like money that it's really easy to be unrighteous with money. There's that. So there might be more here than just he did what was wrong, he was dishonest, the master commended it, Jesus used that as a good example of what you should be like. That's certainly not what's happening here. There's a bit more to it than that. There's more in this way too. Let's read one more passage. Luke chapter 16, 10 through 15. Jesus adds some more to this parable's takeaway. One, he says, who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. Now, is that a contrast, faithful versus dishonest or unfaithful? Or is it a parallel? What does dishonest mean here? I think it's a safe conclusion that it's a contrast, but there's another possibility. If then, verse 11, you have not been faithful in the, there it is again, unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you true riches? So if you haven't handled the physical things in your life that here he calls unrighteous wealth, if you aren't a good steward of them, if you aren't generous with them and kind with them, back earlier, if you aren't making friends with them, preparing for eternity, why would God give you anything greater than that? Verse 12. I'm in 14 now. All right. Verse 12, and if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? And then he makes this straightforward point. No servant can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And then let's not miss these next two verses. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard these things, and they ridiculed him. He said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. What is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. And these verses right here parallel with Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 20. We're not going to go there tonight, but you can compare that. The last part of this in verse 13 is almost a quote from Matthew 6:24, or vice versa. The exact same statement, or at least very close, about not serving both. Here's what Jesus wants us to know and wants us to do. From this parable and the whole story, regardless of exactly what he means when he has the master commending the servant. But that one, that's not the point. Here's the point. The point is about preparation, isn't it? Be careful what you do now with what you're given. Be careful how you use your money. Be careful you don't become a lover of money. Be careful that you're generous in giving to the poor and others that need your help. That's also, there's another parable coming. Be careful. If anything, he's saying here, That people who handle earthly goods sometimes are smart in how they do that. They prepare for the future. They have their CDs and their IRAs and all of that. They're shrewd and careful with their money. But then when it comes to spiritual things, even the people of God, not prepared for the real future to come, eternity. Or at least we should be. And then it's about money and things and possessions having their proper place. Isn't that the point he makes? He drives the stake in verse 13 when he says, you can't have it both ways. You can't make an idol, or at least you better not make money an idol. Don't make it your God. I mean, if there's anything that makes a terrible God, it's paper with some words printed on it that the government says has money and gold behind it. Right? We do that today. They did it with coins and vineyards and houses and all that then. We do almost the exact same today with our assets and real estate and all of that. That's the overall lesson from the parable and parables here. You should be careful. The day is coming, eternity. Make sure that the things in your life are just things, not something more. And this isn't something I'd get wrapped around the axle about, but I've had my kids catch me saying it. So, but we teach our kids that you don't use the word love for things. You love people. You love God before that even. You like things. It's okay to like things. Even when that's the way we talk, it might reveal more about our hearts than we'd like to admit. 3 questions for our question and answer session tonight. A couple that kind of brain teasers. A third one that it has that, but also might be a time when we could miss the forest for the trees. Now, I don't know exactly what verse 8 means. I have some ideas. But I do know the point that Jesus made about the danger of money and things. That's why he said it's so difficult for a rich person. Not impossible, but it's so difficult for them to follow God. Because once you get a lot, it's easy for it to take over your heart. As we think about that tonight, where is your heart? Where's my heart? In that other passage, he says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Is your heart devoted to Jesus tonight? I know most of us in here tonight, a lot of us have been immersed in Jesus years ago. We made that decision. Do you remember that? You know when that happened? When you said to Jesus, I will follow you. I'll follow you wherever, whatever happens. Even if you didn't say those words or think those words, that's what you were doing. When you were baptized into Jesus. What's happened since? Where are you tonight when it comes to following Jesus? Who said, you cannot be a slave to God and a slave to possessions. Let's stand and sing together.